In October of 1993, I was 9 years old and sitting in my third grade classroom in Wood Hollow, Minnesota, when the lockdown alarm went off. Back then, we didn't even know what a lockdown was. No one told us anything, just that we had to stay quiet, stay put. But that morning started like any other. Bright sky picture day buzz kids tugging at their collars and checking their hair in the glass of the classroom windows. And then one of us was gone. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Amy Salvin. I grew up in Wood Hollow. I still live here, actually. Not by choice, really. It's just the kind of place that holds on to you. After I graduated, I went straight into law enforcement. I guess I liked the idea of facts, of making sense of things. But some stories, they don't follow a straight line. And some names, you carry them whether you mean to or not. Back then, in the fall of '93, Wood Hollow was the kind of town where people left their cars unlocked and waved to their neighbors. My parents were both teachers. I had a little brother. We walked to school most mornings, jackets unzipped even when we shouldn't have. It was a quiet place. Safe, we thought. I went to Wood Hollow Elementary. The building's still there. Red brick 2 stories, maple trees out front. Picture day was always a big deal, especially for the younger grades. The girls would wear dresses with stiff collars or little bows. The boys would tug at clip-on ties and scuff their shoes on purpose. There was always too much hairspray, too many barrettes. That year, I was in Miss Ellison's 3rd grade class, but one hallway over was Miss Talon's 2nd grade, room 2B. That's where Malene Harper sat. I didn't know her, not really. I remember seeing her once in the lunch line. She was small, quieter than most. Wore a yellow dress with daisy buttons. It stuck with me. October 5th was unseasonably warm that year. Leaves were just starting to fall, crunching under our shoes as we came in. I remember that morning perfectly. Not because of anything big, but because it felt normal. That kind of normal you don't recognize until it's gone. Picture day always brought a mix of nerves and excitement. The hallways buzzed. The gym had flooded the night before, so the photo setup was moved to the multi-purpose room. That kind of thing threw everything off. Teachers were juggling schedules and kids were moving in and out of class for their turn in front of the camera. It was chaos, but the kind adults write off as harmless. I remember looking out the window during math and seeing the line of 2nd graders heading down the hallway, all dressed up little hands clutching combs and permission slips. Somewhere in that line was Malene. By lunch, the energy had changed. Teachers looked uneasy. There was a strange announcement over the intercom asking staff to check rooms and restrooms. A 2nd grade teacher stood frozen in the hallway, her clipboard pressed to her chest like she couldn't breathe right. We were told to stay inside. No one explained why. That was the moment for me, at least when I felt it. Not fear, not yet. Just something off. A stillness that didn't belong in a building full of children. And then the front doors locked. And we started to hear the adults whisper her name, Malene. And that was when I knew. Something was wrong. She was just gone. One moment in line for pictures and the next, no one knew where she'd gone. It didn't hit all at once, not for me. I remember sitting at my desk that afternoon flipping a pencil between my fingers when I first noticed the adults weren't moving the way they usually did. There was a kind of controlled stillness, like they were waiting for something to confirm what they already feared. The first time I saw Miss Talon that day, she was standing frozen in the hallway outside room 2B. Her mouth slightly open like she'd forgotten how to speak. She was gripping her clipboard against her chest so hard the plastic had bowed in the middle. That was the last time any of us saw her looking calm. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, is that she'd already checked every corner of that school herself before anyone made an announcement. By the time Principal Riggs came upstairs, she was certain Malene wasn't with the nurse, hadn't gone to the bathroom, hadn't wandered off to the library like she sometimes did when her stomach hurt. Her lunch was still in her cubby. Her backpack hung neatly beside her desk. Inside it was a folder with My Little Pony stickers and a half-colored math worksheet. One burnt orange crayon lay on top of it, and her name was still checked off on the attendance sheet by someone. At 12:15, the school office confirmed no one had signed her out. Not a parent, not a guardian. No phone calls had come in. That's when they made the first all-call over the PA system. I remember it word for word. Faculty and staff, please check your classrooms, bathrooms, and any common areas for a student. Malene Harper, 2nd grade. Brown hair, yellow dress. Last seen this morning during picture sessions. This is not a drill. Kids got quiet after that. Not scared exactly, just confused. The noise in the cafeteria dropped. The lunch monitors whispered. By the time we were back in class, even the loud kids sat still. At 1:15, Malene's mother arrived. Valerie Harper. She was still in her scrubs from the urgent care hair pulled-back name badge clipped to her collar. I only saw her through the office window as she paced the front sidewalk talking fast to a uniformed officer. Her husband wasn't there yet. He worked construction out in Duluth and had a long drive in. Valerie kept saying the same thing over and over. She didn't come home. She always calls if she's going to be late. She's never just not here. They initiated lockdown protocols shortly after. Every door was checked, every exit monitored. By late afternoon, even the AV closet in the basement had been searched. At 2:00 p.m., they officially declared Malene Harper missing. It felt like the air inside the building changed, like something had been peeled open that wouldn't close again. The sun dipped low around 4:30, and by then there were police cars on every side of the school. Parents had begun to gather out front. Some were crying. Others just looked stunned, like they couldn't wrap their heads around what was happening in their small town on a Tuesday afternoon. There was no break-in, no sounds of a struggle, no visible sign of anything. It was like she'd been erased. Later that evening, volunteers joined the police in the woods behind the school. I remember seeing the lines of people combing through the brush, calling her name, voices breaking into the cold air. I stood at the edge of the parking lot with my dad. He worked for the district and had stayed late to help coordinate. He didn't speak much that night, just stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes fixed on the tree line. The woods didn't give anything back. Just a piece of yellow cloth caught on a branch that didn't match her dress. No footprints. No blood. No trail. That night, the local news ran a brief segment. Missing child in Wood Hollow. Last seen wearing a yellow dress with daisy buttons. If you have any information, call the tip line. The image they used was last year's school portrait. She was smiling in it, head tilted slightly, eyes soft. It was the last official photo the school had of her. That would change 30 years later when a forgotten roll of film resurfaced. Frame 24. A close-up of Malene on picture day, hair-curled expression, unreadable lips, slightly parted eyes, looking just past the camera, and a hand resting gently on her left shoulder. A man's hand, scarred and glossy, the skin tight and discolored from an old burn. Whoever it belonged to never looked at the camera. They didn't need to. But in that moment captured forever, Malene didn't look afraid. She looked like she'd just realized something too late. When I saw that photo for the first time in 2023, I was a detective with Wood Hollow PD. I'd come back home after college, joined the force, kept my head down. I knew this town. I knew how it breathed, how it closed ranks, how it forgets. But I hadn't forgotten Malene. I remember the lockdown. I remember her empty chair at lunch. I remember how the teacher cried behind her desk when she thought we weren't looking. What I didn't remember was that photograph. No one did. It had never been printed, never added to the yearbook, never sent home. It slipped through the cracks, undeveloped, left in a dark-room drawer by the school photographer Martin Kellerman. And when he finally found it 3 decades later, it cracked open everything we thought we'd buried. Martin called the tip line the night he developed the film. He left a voicemail around midnight. His voice shook, but the message was clear. I think it's her. I think it's Malene Harper. I don't remember taking it, but someone else was in the frame, someone I don't recognize. The next morning, I sat across from him in a private room at the station. He was 72 now, frail cane resting between his knees, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. The photo lay between us in an archival sleeve. He didn't want to touch it. I don't remember taking it, he said again, but that's my setup, my lights, my camera. That was me. I asked if he remembered anything about that day, anyone unusual. He said he was running late. His assistant had called in sick. The whole session was chaos. A substitute janitor came in twice. He thought maybe there was a man near the doorway. Mid-40s thin, didn't say much, just stood there. He assumed it was a parent. Nobody questioned it. It was picture day. People came and went. That's how it was back then. But then he looked closer at the image, at the hand on Malene's shoulder. The skin was stretched and glossy scarred. There was no sleeve, no shirt cuff, just the hand resting gently, almost fatherly. But wrong. I had that photo blown up in our forensics lab. We enhanced the contrast, pulled out more details. Just behind Malene, barely visible past the edge of the backdrop, was the outline of a doorway, a door that wasn't in the current school blueprints. That same day, I dug through the city archives, maintenance plans from the early 90s, and there it was, a small janitor's closet, sealed off around 1997. It had been behind the stage partition in the multipurpose room right where the photo was taken. I called it in, ordered the wall cut open. When the drywall came down, we found the room. Narrow, 8 feet deep, 4 feet wide. Foam insulation on the walls. A pink blanket crumpled in the corner. An empty juice cup. And carved into the foam, barely visible until the light hit it just right, was a word scratched over and over again. Small, uneven, desperate. It just said, help. The day after we opened that sealed closet, I walked into the evidence room and found the photo sitting under a magnifier. Same one I'd been staring at since the night Martin brought it in. The hand still didn't belong to anyone in the old staff files, and the doorway behind the muslin backdrop, barely visible in the original frame, wasn't marked on any current blueprints of the building. But when we traced it back through archival maintenance records, we found it had once been listed as a janitor's closet. Sealed up sometime after 1997, no reason given. That was enough to bring in forensics. They cut open the drywall section by section. The room inside was small, just big enough for a child to sit or lie down. Pink blanket in the corner. Broken mop handle. 2 cracked plastic buckets. It smelled like insulation and dust. On the far wall, curled and yellowed, was an old calendar from October 1993. A single date circled in red. Tuesday the 5th, the day Malene vanished. That night, I reviewed the calendar again in my office, and that's when I saw the name. Written in fading cursive along the inside edge just above the staples, C.R. Talland. I froze. The name wasn't unfamiliar. It matched the teacher who'd taken Malene's class to pictures that day, Miss Abigail Talland. She was still living in town, retired now, lived alone in a small house just outside the old district line. I'd interviewed her once before, shortly after we reopened the case. She'd been quiet but cooperative, said she remembered Malene clearly, said she'd assumed the girl went to the nurse or library after photos, that it had been chaotic, that she hadn't noticed she was missing until lunch, she hadn't mentioned having any relatives, and yet there it was in her handwriting or someone close to her, C.R. Talland. I called in Officer Lexi Duran to run a full background check, family employment history known associates. Took a few hours, but she found it. Abigail Talland had a brother. Name Caleb Russell Talland, born 1954. Arrested once in 1982 for attempted abduction of a minor. Charges were dropped. Child refused to testify. No conviction. and according to records, no trace of him after 2006. No death certificate, no driver's license renewals. Nothing since. But in the early 90s, he'd used the alias Blaine Carter on multiple job applications. One of them matched a third-party staffing agency that contracted with schools in the region, including Wood Hollow Elementary. That was our name. Mr. Blaine, written in pencil on the October 5th attendance log under staff present. He'd been right there on paper the whole time. Never added to the payroll, never listed in official records, just penciled in, and no one had questioned it. When we brought Abigail in again, she looked older than I remembered, smaller too. She wore a lavender coat and carried a worn leather purse with her name stitched on the tag. She didn't ask why we called her in, just followed quietly down the hallway and sat in interview room 3 with her hands folded in her lap. I laid the visitor log and the calendar on the table between us. "This is your brother's handwriting, isn't it?" I asked. She looked at the papers, then down at her hands. "His name is Caleb," I said. "He used the name Blaine Carter in the early 90s. You vouched for him with a temp agency, didn't you?" Her lips tightened. She didn't speak. "He wasn't just a visitor that day," I said. "He had access. He had keys. He was in the room." "Did you know he was there?" She finally looked up, eyes rimmed red but dry. "He said he needed the work," she whispered. "Said it would just be for one day." I asked why she hadn't told anyone. She said she was afraid. They would have fired me. I didn't think he would. Her voice trailed off. I leaned forward. "You wrote him in on the attendance sheet. That means you knew he was inside the building. That means you were aware." She gave a slow nod. "I thought she was just missing," she said. "I thought maybe she ran away." Then she swallowed hard. "I didn't think he—" Another pause, then almost too soft to hear. "He used to call little girls princess." I asked if she'd ever seen him near Malene. She looked up suddenly sharper. "Only once, outside the gym. I told him he couldn't be there, that he needed to leave. He smiled and said, 'I already got what I came for.'" That was the first time I saw her cry. She turned her face away from the glass and kept her hands folded the way she had when she first sat down. I left the room without saying much more. I didn't need to. Her silence said enough. That same afternoon, I went back to the evidence room to review the photo again. Frame 24. I don't know what I was expecting. Something new to appear, maybe. But it was the same every time. Malene's face, eyes wide, hair curled. A folded note card in her hands. A faint red smear across the front of her dress. And behind her the hand. Scarred. Shiny. Left thumb curled slightly. Forensics was already working to identify fingerprints or any trace evidence, but there was something else I hadn't looked at closely before. The note. Just the edge of it folded tight between her fingers. I had the tech zoom in adjust for clarity. The words on the front, faint but visible, read, "For Daddy." That's when I stepped back. I'd been staring at that image for days, weeks even, and somehow I hadn't seen it. I called Valerie Harper that evening, Malene's mother. I told her gently that we'd recovered a photograph, that Malene was in it, alive. She didn't ask many questions, just listened. When I mentioned the card, she went quiet. Then she said she used to draw pictures and write little notes to her dad all the time. Little things, just to tell him she was being good, that she missed him. She liked to leave them around the house, on the kitchen counter, under his pillow. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She always thought if she wrote it down, it would last longer. That was the first time I understood just how long Malene must have been in that room. Long enough to be given paper, or to find it. Long enough to believe she had to show someone she'd been good, that she deserved to be taken home. But whoever she thought she was writing to, he wasn't her father. And now I was beginning to understand just how deep that manipulation went. The next morning, I went back to the original calendar from the sealed closet, looked at the handwriting again. The same loopy cursive showed up in another file. A worksheet from room 2B, Maline's own. Her name written across the top in careful purple marker. A quiet, precise child, one who noticed things, one who remembered. What struck me most wasn't what she left behind. It was what she didn't. No screaming, no signs of struggle, no message scrawled in panic, just a card. For Daddy. And a stillness behind her eyes that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. I closed the file and made the call. I told forensics to search that entire school again, inch by inch. Because if Maline had been hidden in one place, it was possible there was another, maybe more. Maybe somewhere no one had thought to look. Yet. There's something that happens when you start reopening boxes people thought were closed. You don't just find the thing you're looking for, you start seeing all the things people hoped you wouldn't. After we confirmed Caleb Talon's alias and placed him inside the school on the day Maline vanished, the case file didn't feel like a mystery anymore. It felt like something that had been made to disappear on purpose. I stayed late that night, going over the earliest reports, the witness statements, the floor plans, everything. Most of it was typewritten, faded. Some pages still smelled faintly of smoke and mildew from the old records room. There was one detail I couldn't shake. In the original list of substitute staff on October 5th, 1993, there was a name I didn't recognize, J. Halpern, listed as a sub-teacher. No file, no photograph. The signature on the log barely legible. Signed in before 9, signed out before noon. I flagged it and moved on. By then, the closet discovery had made its way to regional task forces, and the state crime lab agreed to assist. We were already running partial prints and collecting any trace evidence left behind the sealed wall, but I wanted more eyes on that photo frame 24. Not just forensics, but image reconstruction. A local team out of Duluth still worked with analog film development, and they were willing to run a deeper scan on the negative. They started with ultraviolet processing, then infrared, then something called spectral analysis. It was slow work, but it paid off. Behind the blurred edge of the photo, past Maline's elbow, just barely visible behind the backdrop, was something we hadn't noticed before. A handle. Not a mop bucket or tripod stand. A metal door handle. And right beside it, a curtain. Vinyl vertical, the kind used to divide gymnasiums and nurse stations in older schools. I had a bad feeling about it. The building had been renovated so many times that most of the blueprints were out of date. But we managed to track down a set of original maintenance plans filed with the city in 1992. One area stood out. Behind the multi-purpose room, behind the old janitor's closet, there was another space. No name, no purpose. Just a narrow section marked as an auxiliary storage unit. I drove back out to the school, now the Wood Hollow Community Center, and asked the property manager if anyone had ever used that section. He said he didn't even know it existed. The mirrors from the dance studio had been installed over that wall years ago. We took them down. Underneath was drywall, smooth, unbroken, but you could see where something had once been sealed off. The framing didn't match. The seams were uneven. I stood there while the forensics crew brought in tools, lights, gloves, a rotary saw. They cut slowly, one section at a time. The air inside that wall hadn't moved in 30 years. It hit us like a punch-old dust insulation, something faint and sour underneath. The room was narrow, about 6 feet wide, 10 feet deep. No windows, no vents, a foam-lined interior. A cracked mop handle. A broken plastic bucket. And in the far corner, folded and sun-bleached, was a pink blanket. The same kind we'd found behind the wall in the photo room. But what caught my attention wasn't the blanket. It was the words scratched into the foam along the back wall. Not written with ink. Scraped in over and over. A single word. Help. We had found something real. A place built to hide a child short term. There was no plumbing, no trash, no food storage. Whoever made that space never meant to keep her there. They meant to move her. I went back to the evidence board, laid out everything we had. Frame 24, the closet, the auxiliary space, the calendar, the card marked for Daddy, and that attendance sheet pencil marks that had never been verified. I kept coming back to the name Abigail Tayland. Her brother Caleb had vanished from public records in 2006. Last known residence, a trailer lot in St. Louis County. DMV records expired. No recent employment. But before he disappeared, he'd been seen working odd jobs under another name. Randall Clay. It didn't mean much until one of the analysts brought me a yearbook. 2nd grade. Class photo. Maline's class. The shot had been taken right before lunch, a group of squirmy kids lined up on a bench. But one person was missing. The substitute. There was no adult in the frame. I reached out to one of the kids from that class now, a teacher himself, Daniel Myers. He agreed to meet. When I asked if he remembered anything from picture day, he said something strange. Miss Talland was there in the morning, but after recess we had a man. He was tall, thin, didn't talk much. Just stood there, looking at us like he was studying something. I asked if he remembered him saying anything to Maline. He said yes. The man had leaned down and whispered something to her near the cubbies. Maline didn't answer. After that, she didn't talk to anyone. When I asked how he remembered all this, Daniel said something that stuck with me. Because she stopped playing. Even when the teacher tried to get her to join, she just stared at the door. I brought that statement back to the board and compared it to the timing on the logs. Whoever that man was, whether he was using Caleb's identity or someone else's, he had been in the building long enough to isolate her, long enough to speak to her, and then he left. That name again, J. Halpern, didn't exist in state teaching records, but we traced the ID used to apply for that sub-job. It was a fake. The photo matched a man arrested in 1991 under the name Randall Clay Caleb's known associate. Same aliases, same handwriting on the applications. Randall had been in prison the day of the disappearance, so someone else had used his papers. Facial recognition confirmed it. The sub wasn't Halpern. It wasn't Randall. It was Caleb, disguised, wearing his friend's identity to walk through the front doors of that school without a single question. The pieces were starting to fit, slowly. But no one had reported seeing him leave the building. No one had checked the full property. Not really. Because for 30 years, everyone assumed he'd walked her out. But I didn't believe that anymore. I started to think maybe she hadn't gone anywhere at all. Not that day. And maybe not the next. I turned back to the calendar. October 5th was circled in red, but there were smudges along the week. Small ones, like fingertips, or pencil eraser marks that had been scrubbed away and faded over time. Someone had tried to mark more than one day. I circled the dates. 5, 6, 7. I ran them against the original call logs, and that's when I noticed something else. A service call had been placed on the morning of the 8th. Not by school staff, but by an outside contractor. Plumbing. Maintenance request submitted for a clog in the West Wing. The log never made it to the final report. The work was marked complete, no follow-up. The request was handwritten. No technician name, just a contact number and an address. I ran the number, disconnected, but the address Duluth, same county where Caleb had last been seen. I printed it out, folded the page once, tucked it into the front of the file. I didn't know what we'd find there, or if there was still anything left to find. But I had a feeling. A place like that, the kind where someone can vanish and still be remembered, it doesn't let go of its ghosts that easy. And if Maline had left anything behind, she'd left it on purpose. Quietly, carefully. For someone who'd finally know where to look. The house sat at the end of a dirt road in what used to be a logging community west of Duluth. Overgrown pines leaned against the fence line. The siding was warped and stripped in places, a metal gutter half detached from the roofline swinging a little in the wind. There were no other homes within sight, just the woods tall and quiet. When I stepped out of the car, I could hear my own footsteps on the gravel. It was that kind of still. The property had been listed under a shell name, Leland Thomas. No social, no history. But a utility record from 2007 showed someone had paid cash every month on time for nearly 4 years. Then nothing. I walked the perimeter first. There were animal tracks in the mud behind the house, deer mostly, but no fresh tire marks, no signs of recent use. A rusted lock hung loose from the back shed, but when I pushed the door open, all I saw were broken crates and a pile of rotted canvas tarps. The main house was boarded at the windows, 2 locks on the door, both rusted but not fully seized. I used a crowbar to loosen the frame. The air inside was dry and stale, heavy with old wood dust and something else underneath it. Not rot exactly, just time. The front room was stripped. No furniture, no curtains, no light fixtures. Just marks on the walls where paintings had once hung, square outlines where color hadn't faded. I moved through the house slowly, one room at a time. Most of it had been cleared out long ago, but the wallpaper in the hallway was still intact. Sun-faded yellow flowers repeating in a pattern that didn't match itself. In one corner, near the baseboard, I found scratches, small, parallel, as if someone had dragged a metal object over the trim again and again in the same spot. The back bedroom was colder than the others. It faced the woods, and the window there had been covered with a slab of plywood from the inside. When I shone my flashlight around the room, something caught the beam near the closet door, a red tag hanging from a nail. I stepped closer. It was an old price tag, still attached to a piece of string, the kind you'd find on a child's coat. I lifted it gently. No coat. Just the tag blank on one side with a faded sticker on the other. The number was written in black marker, 263. It didn't match anything in our files, not a school number, not evidence inventory. But something about it felt familiar. I tucked it into an evidence bag and turned back toward the hall. That's when I saw it. A panel in the hallway wall that didn't match the rest. Slightly warped, different nails. I tapped it lightly with the side of my hand. Hollow. It took me about 5 minutes to pry it loose. Behind it was a narrow crawl space lined with insulation. No more than 2 feet high. I had to get down on my stomach to look inside. There was no light, just the faint smell of mothballs and something that had long since dried up. I crawled in 4 feet, then 6. At the far end, I found a small wooden box, unfinished pine warped slightly along the lid. No lock, just a slip of ribbon tied once around the middle. I brought it out into the open and set it gently on the floor. When I lifted the lid, I saw a stack of folded papers, drawings, all done in crayon. All the same handwriting, childlike, careful, uneven. The top one was a picture of a house. 2 stick figures, a girl and a man. Above them, in purple, the words, "Me and Daddy." The next showed a room. Foam walls, a bed, a cup, a card on the floor. The girl stood in the corner with a sad face. Above that one, I was good today. Each page was labeled, numbered, 1 through 12. The last page was blank except for the words, "Please still love me." I sat back and didn't move for a long time. The air in the room didn't stir. The sun outside had started to drop, casting a narrow beam across the wood floor. Dust floated through it in slow motion. These weren't just drawings. They were messages, left behind, stashed away in a place only someone who knew fear would think to use. I called it in, gave the location, secured the scene. But I kept the box with me just long enough to photograph each page. When I brought the photos back to the station and laid them out on the board, Lexi Duran walked in behind me and went still. She stared at the final image. She was trying to be found, she said, even back then. That night, I reopened the original interview transcripts from October 1993, and something finally stood out. A janitor, Gus Reynolds, had reported seeing a man enter the west stairwell around 10:30 a.m., claimed he wore a white shirt, no badge, said he was new, looked off. The report ended with a note. No further action taken. Assumed vendor. But Reynolds had written something else in the margin. A detail that had never made it to the typed report. I had to hold the page to the light to see it. 4 words scrawled faintly in pencil. Scarred hand. Left side. The same hand in frame 24. I sat there looking at that line, and everything fell back into place. They'd seen him. At least once. And even then, even with that detail in the report, no one had followed up. Because no one believed what didn't fit the image they'd already accepted that Malene had simply vanished. But she hadn't. She'd waited. Drawn. Hidden what she could in a box no one thought to look for. And left behind something only someone like her would understand. Not a confession, not a cry, just a memory crayon on paper. I turned the final page over one more time. In the bottom corner, in the same purple crayon, was a number. 263. The tag from the closet. I finally understood. It wasn't random. It was the order of the drawings, the number of the blanket she'd been wrapped in, the only label she'd been given in that space. Not a name, a number. We cross-checked it with old district supply orders and found a match, set 263 kindergarten nap blankets. Inventory from 1992. One set had been marked missing. I made a note, red marker, and underlined it twice, because that meant whoever took her had access to supply rooms, had time to choose, had time to make it seem like it all just slipped past us. But it hadn't. Not anymore. I had enough now to request a full forensic team at the property, but before I locked up, I looked at the blank page again. Please still love me. She didn't mean her parents. Not really. She meant whoever was keeping her there. Whoever convinced her this was what love looked like. And that was what turned my stomach most. It wasn't just the hiding. It wasn't the silence. It was how well they taught her to ask for nothing. To wait quietly, to obey, even when she knew she wouldn't be answered. We sent the drawings to the lab that night, 12 pages in total, each cataloged and scanned. Forensics confirmed the paper was consistent with school supplies issued in the early 90s, same for the crayon pigment, but it was the pressure of the lines that told us the most light strokes, uneven pressure pauses in mid-curve. It matched what you'd see from a child trying not to cry while writing. I stayed in the evidence room well past midnight. The building was quiet, just the hum of overhead lights and the soft rustle of the air vents. I kept replaying it in my mind, those calendar marks, the blanket tag, the empty crawl space. It was like Malene had been leaving pieces behind the whole time, but only now were we learning to listen. The next morning, I drove back to Duluth, this time with a warrant. We had enough for full access to the property, including the secondary structure listed behind the main house. What we thought was a shed turned out to be a converted utility cabin. No windows. A padlock on both the front and side doors. The locks weren't original. These were newer, well-oiled, with no signs of weathering. Someone had been maintaining them. Inside the space was divided into 2 narrow rooms. The front section was empty except for a folding chair, a shortwave radio, and a black plastic bin filled with burned matchsticks. The walls were lined with foil insulation, a heat lamp affixed to the ceiling. The air inside was hot, almost metallic. The back room was worse. Low ceiling, no natural light, faint odor of bleach, floor lined with plastic sheeting layers of it wrinkled and taped down along the seams. On the far wall, a grid of Polaroids, dozens of them, all labeled with numbers. No names, just dates, all between 1992 and 1995. Most of the images were too degraded to make out, but one showed a folded pink blanket. Another, photo number 263, matched the tag we'd recovered. There was no child in that frame. Just the blanket, a corner of foam padding, and what looked like a handwritten card face down on the floor. I took a breath, leaned closer, and saw the outline of a purple crayon heart in the corner. Malene had been here. At least once. Maybe more than once. I had the entire place photographed, measured, sealed. The Polaroids were collected and sent for chemical restoration. What we didn't expect was what they found under the floor. One of the crime scene techs noticed a gap in the layering, an uneven patch where the plastic dipped slightly as if something had shifted underneath. We peeled it back and found a trap door painted the same color as the subfloor, almost invisible. The hinges were newer. Underneath, a shallow compartment lined with concrete, no more than 3 feet deep. It had been used to store something once shallow indentations in the surface corners darkened by moisture, as if a box or crate had sat there for a long time. But what stood out was the writing etched into the underside of the trap door. Not carved. Scratched. Faint, but legible. 3 words. Not a game. We stood there in silence for a long time. I don't think any of us needed to say what we were thinking. This hadn't been a random act or a moment of panic. It was a plan, a pattern, and someone had made sure it stayed buried. Back at the station, I reviewed the case files from the early 90s, searching for any other missing children that might line up with the dates on the photos. 2 names came up, both girls. One vanished from a park in Cass County, 1992, the other from a motel parking lot in Hibbing, 1994, both around the same age. Both unsolved. I contacted the regional field office and requested full files. They arrived in 2 boxes, both thick with interviews, timelines, maps. The similarities were there. Each girl disappeared in daylight within a 3-hour radius of Duluth. No witnesses, no physical evidence. Both families received handwritten notes in the weeks that followed. Notes that were never released publicly. One said, "She is safe. She's learning." The other, "She's being good. Don't look for her." My chest went cold when I read them. I pulled out Malene's crayon drawings and held them beside the scanned copies of the letters. Same rhythm, same tone. A child echoing what she'd been told to believe, that she wasn't lost, that she was chosen, that she had to behave to be kept. I didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. I just read. Page after page, interview after interview. The same words repeated over and over from every adult involved back then. She must have wandered off. Maybe she got confused. There's no sign of foul play. But now, I knew there had been signs. They just hadn't looked like what people expected. Quiet children. Blank spaces. Paper hearts. That evening, I took the Polaroids home. Just the scanned copies. I laid them out on my kitchen table date by date. One of them was darker than the rest, almost too underexposed to read. But with some adjustment, I noticed something in the corner just the edge of a name tag. It read, "Visitor." No name. But above it, in permanent marker, a single letter. C. Not enough to prove identity, but enough to pull the school visitor logs again. October 7th, 1993. 2 days after Malene disappeared. A name had been added in pencil, then crossed out. The erasure was faint, but when the document was scanned with UV, it showed clearly. C. Talland. Someone had tried to remove it, tried to erase the record. And for 30 years, no one had asked why a man with a record and a known alias had shown up at the school days after a girl vanished. I went back to the crime scene photos one more time. Frame 24. The hand behind the curtain. The scarred skin. The curled thumb. I enlarged it until the pixels broke apart. Then I opened the Polaroid from the utility cabin number 263. Same hand. Same position. same curve in the knuckle. But older, stiffer. I printed both and placed them side by side. Maline's image, the cabin image, and above them the final crayon page. Please still love me. I looked at that page longer than I meant to, and then I made the call. I told them to reopen every missing persons file from 1992 to 1996 with a match in gender, age, and region. I asked for access to the old media reels, the letters sent to families, even the envelopes, because the truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was documented, filed, scanned, forgotten. And Maline wasn't the only one, not by a long shot. When the restoration lab called, I was in the middle of logging visitor badge records from 1992 through 96. I'd been staring at names for hours, most of them ordinary volunteers, vendors, maintenance contractors, the kind of people who come and go without a second glance. But the lab didn't waste time with small talk. They just said, "We got a match," and sent over the scan. It was Polaroid 11. The lighting had been adjusted, the contrast pulled up just enough to show what the original couldn't. It was a photo of a room, small padded walls, discolored from age. And in the corner, partially obscured by shadow, was a child's face. One eye visible, thin shoulder, and behind her, pressed against the far wall, the same heart sticker Maline had drawn in crayon. It was her. I didn't need anyone to tell me. Same cheekbones, same downturned lip, the way her hands were folded in her lap like she didn't know where to put them. It wasn't a candid shot. It was posed, controlled, like someone had told her how to sit, where to look. The timestamp on the back was October 12, 1993, a full week after she vanished. She'd still been alive then. That changed everything. I took the photo straight to the district attorney's office and laid it on her desk. I watched her face shift as she looked at it. First confusion, then recognition, then something colder. She said, "Who else has seen this?" I told her just the lab and me. She nodded, reached for the phone, and called in the case review team. By that afternoon, we had a formal reclassification. Maline Harper presumed deceased, now listed as a recovered victim of prolonged abduction and unlawful confinement. That gave us what we needed to move. I requested a direct search of all active and retired employees from the Wood Hollow School District from 1989 to 1995. Anyone with access to storage rooms, utility panels, visitor logs, custodial staff, substitutes, contractors, anyone who could move freely without raising alarm. I also went back through the 1993 interview tapes. Most had been recorded on Hi-8 stored in the city archives, never digitized. They were slow-filled with small talk, procedural questions. Most of the teachers seemed genuinely shaken. But one interview stood out not because of what was said, but because of how short it was. Less than 2 minutes. A man named Charles Talland claimed to be a part-time maintenance helper brought on by a district subcontractor. No employment file, no background check. No follow-up interview, just 2 questions and a thank you for your time. When I looked at the tape again, I paused it on his hands. Scar on the left side curling over the thumb joint. Same as the one in Polaroid 24. Same hand behind the curtain. I pulled his file. There wasn't much. A P.O. box in 2 Harbors. No current address. Last known vehicle registered in 1996. But he'd received mail as recently as 5 years ago at a storage unit just outside of Cloquet. I got a warrant and drove there myself. The facility manager was nervous. Said the unit hadn't been accessed in years. The payment had been made automatically month after month, always in cash delivered by mail. When we opened the door, the smell hit first. Not rot, just old fabric mildew and that dry, sour air that clings to forgotten spaces. Inside were shelves lined with labeled boxes, school supplies, laminated ID cards, old file folders from at least 5 different elementary schools across the state. All from the same 3-year window. I went box by box slowly. Most of it was innocuous, unused forms, janitorial logs, lesson plans. But near the bottom of the stack I found a manila envelope sealed in red tape. No label. Inside were 3 photographs. Each one showed a different child. None of them were Malene. One had a name tag, Harper, but the first name didn't match. It wasn't her. I froze, staring at the other 2. I didn't recognize them, but I could tell they were taken in the same room, same padding, same light, same awful stillness. That meant there were more. Possibly many more. We ran the faces through the missing children database. One match came back almost immediately, a girl who vanished from a rest stop near the Iowa border in 1991. Her case had gone cold after just 3 months. The photo we had of her was grainy, age-progressed and smiling. In the envelope photo, her face was blank. No smile. Just the kind of quiet you learn when you've been told not to speak unless asked. The news went wide after that. A full task force was assembled. Old officers recalled, families recontacted, boxes reopened. I was given clearance to lead the field interviews. That meant I had to sit in living rooms that hadn't changed in 30 years and ask parents what they remembered about their children's last words. I listened to voicemail recordings that had been saved on cassette. I held sweaters still faintly scented with the kind of laundry soap you can't buy anymore. And every time I opened a folder, I wondered if I'd find her name again. But I never did. Malene's file stayed singular. Her drawings, her handwriting, her quiet, desperate hope that someone would still love her even after all that time. She'd been the only one to leave a trail. That made her different. Or maybe it made her lucky. Because after all these years, her voice still found a way to be heard. At the very bottom of the cloquet storage box under a warped filing cabinet drawer, I found something strange. It was a small tape recorder. Manual. Duct tape across the battery compartment. Inside was a microcassette unmarked except for a piece of masking tape labeled 1017. No year. Just the date. I brought it back to the lab. It took 2 hours to find a machine that would play it. The audio was rough, muffled, static in some parts. But then a sound came through. A soft voice. Childlike. And familiar. She said, "Today we learned colors." I picked purple. Then silence. Then a click. Then another voice, deeper. Older. Male. He said, "Good girl. Try again." Then the tape cut off. I rewound it 3 times, listening for something I might have missed. But there was nothing more. Just that quiet moment, her voice, clear as day, floating across 3 decades to say she was still there. Still trying. Still trying to be found. We didn't arrest him at his house. He didn't have one. When we finally found him, he was parked in the back lot of an old gas station just north of the county line, living out of a 1990 Dodge Ram that had no plates and windows tinted so dark you couldn't see through from the outside. It was the smell that tipped the owner off. He said something felt off when he went to take out the trash and saw the truck still running. We ran the VIN. It was registered to a shell company in Indiana inactive since 1997. But inside, in the glove box, was a laminated ID with the name Charles Talland. And in the trunk under a tarp were 7 cassette tapes. One of them had a date, 10/17, just like the recording we found in the storage unit. Only this one was labeled Review. We bagged everything and brought him in. He didn't resist, didn't say a word when we read the warrant, just held up his hands like he'd been expecting it. At the station, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask for water. He just sat there, quiet, watching. When I asked him about Malene Harper, his eyes didn't even move. I said her name twice. Still nothing. So I played the tape. Not the new one, just the first. The one where she said she chose purple. The one where his voice followed calm and low, saying, "Good girl." And finally he blinked. Once. Slowly. That was it. He didn't confess, but he didn't deny it either. And that silence in the face of her voice that told me more than anything. We ran his fingerprints against every surface from the utility cabin. They matched. Same for the inside latch on the trap door, the Polaroid casing, and the duct tape on the cassette player. But the most damning piece came from the envelope we found at the bottom of the cloquet unit, an index card marked with times and initials. MH, 8 Hazur AM. RH, 10:15. ST, noon. It matched 3 separate disappearances over a span of 13 months. Each child listed by initials, each followed by a time. We cross-referenced the handwriting. It was his. He was charged with 3 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree unlawful confinement, and obstruction of justice related to false records. But that was just the start. The DA said more charges would come as they worked through the physical evidence. Families were notified. Most hadn't heard their daughter's name in a courtroom in over 20 years. One mother, the one from Hibbing, came to the arraignment and sat in the front row. She didn't say a word, just stared at him as they read the charges aloud. He never looked her way. But when they mentioned Malene, he tilted his head. Not fully, just slightly. Like he was listening to a familiar song in the background. I had to leave the room. I didn't go back in until they brought him to holding. I don't know what I expected. Relief, maybe. Closure. But the weight didn't lift. It just settled into something else. Something deeper. We searched every property tied to him, every storage unit, every P.O. box, every parcel of land. In one of them, an abandoned camper hidden off a logging trail, we found something we hadn't seen before. It was a notebook. Child's handwriting. Clumsy. Letters backward in places. On the first page, it said, "My name is Malene. I am learning to write." Then, underneath, day 1. The entries were dated. There were 39 in total. The last one read, "Today I didn't cry. I sat with that for a long time." That line. Not, "I'm okay." Not, "I'm going home." Just a quiet note to herself that the tears had stopped. And what kind of world does a child have to live in where not crying is the best thing that happens all day? That notebook changed everything for the prosecution. It proved length of confinement capacity for memory, and most importantly, that she'd been aware, cognizant. The defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, said he was old, confused, mentally unstable. But those notebooks, the index cards, the storage unit cataloged by year and location, that wasn't confusion, that was order, that was planning. He didn't get bail, he was placed in protective holding pending trial. The trial itself is still ahead. But for once, the story isn't being told through rumors or missing posters or dusty files. It's being told in court, on record, with her name spoken out loud where it belongs. And that matters. Because for 30 years, she was just a photograph, a box in evidence, a case that no one wanted to reopen. And now, every word she left behind, every drawing, every page, every whisper, has become part of something bigger, something real, something that finally made people look. I still visit the site sometimes. The school was torn down years ago, but the foundation's still there. Just cement and weeds and broken glass. But I remember where her desk sat. I remember the corner where her crayon box was found. And I remember the look on her teacher's face when we told her what we'd learned, that Malene had been there longer than anyone thought, that she'd been taken under their noses, that she'd been trying every single day to get someone to notice. And finally, someone did. They never found her body. We knew that might be the case. Even with the confession, even with the boxes of evidence, the photos, the tapes, he never told us where she was. Just said, "She's not there anymore," like that was supposed to mean something. The DA offered a deal, reduced charges in exchange for the exact location. He refused, said the quiet was better that way, and somehow I believed him. Because that's what all of this had been built on. Hadn't it silence, control? And the quiet he left behind was just one more piece of it. He died in county lockup 6 weeks before trial. Cardiac arrest. No family came to claim the body. No one gave a statement. He went out the same way he lived, in the margins, faceless, unclaimed. There wasn't much satisfaction in that. No closure. Just paperwork. A few more boxes stamped and sealed. But I still go back to that notebook sometimes. The one she wrote in. 39 days of trying to hold on to herself. 39 entries that never once asked, why me? She didn't write about fear or pain or what was happening outside those walls. She wrote about the weather, what color she liked, whether the crayon snapped or stayed whole. I don't think she was trying to make sense of anything. I think she just wanted to stay real, to leave something behind that still sounded like her. The other families have their answers now, most of them, anyway. Some chose to stay private. Others attended the memorial we held in early spring where the school used to stand. Just a folding table, some candles, and a line of wooden stakes marking the spot where each child's desk had once been. We didn't read names. We didn't have to. The people who mattered already knew them. And for the first time in decades, no one was asking if the kids just wandered off. No one was blaming the weather or the woods or each other. The silence finally broke. I still think about the last page in that notebook. Today, I didn't cry. I used to wonder if that meant she was giving up. But I don't think so anymore. I think she was holding on in the only way she could by trying not to disappear. Not completely. And maybe that's what stayed with me. Not the horror of what happened. Not the man who caused it. But the girl who kept writing anyway. If you've stayed with this story, thank you. Every time we speak their names, remember their drawings, or share their truth, they come back in a way. A little less forgotten, a little more whole. And maybe that's all we can do for them now. Keep listening, keep noticing. Keep the light on just long enough for someone else to find their way home. If this story stayed with you, share it, so no child's voice gets lost in the dark again.